There are moments in aviation where everything you've learned, every flight hour, every emergency drill, comes down to one single decision. A decision you have less than 4 minutes to make, and that will determine whether 247 people make it home or become just another statistic on the evening news. This is one of those stories. And if you're here looking for real tales from the skies, you're in the right place, because what I'm about to tell you didn't come from any flight manual. There's no procedure for what we lived through that day. And when you discover what really happened at 39,000 feet over the South Atlantic, you'll understand why some of us still wake up in the middle of the night, cold sweat, reliving every second of those 22 minutes that changed our lives forever. My name is Captain Jake Richardson, and I've been commanding commercial aircraft for 26 years. I've flown every continent, faced storms, emergency landings, engine failures, hydraulic problems, whatever you can think of. I've probably been through it. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened on the flight connecting New York to London that Thursday morning that started like any other. It was September 12th, 0423 local time, and we were about 5 hours 15 minutes out from Heathrow, flying over one of the most remote parts of the South Atlantic Ocean. Aboard our Boeing 767-300, we had 235 passengers and 12 crew members. Families returning from vacation, business executives on trips, exchange students, regular folks living their normal lives, trusting me and my first officer, Mike Thompson, to get them safely to their destination. The flight had been absolutely routine up to that point. We'd taken off from JFK at 10:30 p.m. Wednesday night, made our technical stop in Boston for refueling, standard procedure for transatlantic flights of that distance, refueled, ran all our checks, and took off again at 1:45 a.m. Eastern Time. Weather was picture perfect, favorable winds, unlimited visibility. It was exactly the kind of flight we love. No surprises, no turbulence, passengers sleeping peacefully as we crossed the ocean heading for England. Mike was at the controls at that moment. We always alternate legs on long-haul flights. I was relaxed, having some coffee, reviewing approach procedures for London when the first alarm sounded. It was a sound I'd never heard in real life, only in the simulators during emergency training that you pray you'll never have to use. A sharp, insistent beep accompanied by a yellow light flashing on the hydraulic system alert panel. "Jake," Mike called out, and from the tone in his voice I immediately knew this wasn't something simple. "I'm losing hydraulic pressure in the primary system." I looked at the instruments and felt my stomach drop. Hydraulic pressure was falling like a rock. Without hydraulic systems, we lose control of flaps, spoilers, brakes, and, most critically, primary flight controls. "I have control," I ordered, taking the controls. In emergency situations, the most experienced captain always takes command. Primary hydraulic failure checklist. Mike executed the sequence with precision. We tried activating the backup hydraulic system, but pressure kept dropping. Something was seriously wrong. "Primary hydraulic system, 0 pressure," Mike reported. "Backup system, also losing pressure." That's when the gravity of the situation hit me. Losing one hydraulic system is serious but manageable. Losing 2 systems simultaneously is something that simply shouldn't happen, unless there was a catastrophic failure in the aircraft structure. "Manual hydraulic pump," I ordered, "already activated, not working. The loss is upstream from the pumps." I grabbed the microphone with slightly shaking hands, detail I hoped Mike didn't notice. "London Control, this is Atlantic Airways 428. We are declaring an emergency. Catastrophic dual hydraulic system failure. We need vectors to the nearest airport immediately." The controller's voice came through the radio, calm and professional. "Atlantic Airways 428, London Control. Roger your emergency. Nearest airport is Funchal, heading 075, distance 840 nautical miles. You're cleared for immediate descent to flight level 200 and direct vectors. 840 nautical miles. With the situation we were facing, it would be nearly impossible to maintain aircraft control for that long. I did quick calculations. Without hydraulic systems, we'd have extremely limited control and no ability to use flaps or spoilers on landing. London Control, negative on Funchal. We don't have sufficient control for extended flight. We need alternate landing options within a 300 nautical mile radius." There was a long pause on the other side of the radio. Too long. When you're in an aviation emergency and air traffic control takes time to respond, It's usually not a good sign. Atlantic Airways 428, standby. We're checking options in the area. While we waited, I started doing my own calculations. I grabbed the aeronautical chart and studied our current position. We were flying over one of the most remote regions on the planet, thousands of square miles of open ocean, dotted only by small isolated volcanic islands. "Jake," Mike called my attention to the control instruments, "the ailerons are responding less and less. I think we're going to lose lateral control soon." I looked at the gauges and confirmed we were losing the last vestiges of hydraulic control. If we lost lateral control completely, it would be impossible to keep the aircraft level. "Manual control," I ordered. "We're going to try maintaining control through the engines." And then, for the first time in my 26-year career, I found myself commanding a commercial aircraft with almost no controls, fighting to keep 247 lives safe over the Atlantic Ocean. Engine control is an extreme emergency technique. By increasing power on one engine and decreasing the other, you can make the aircraft turn slightly. But it's imprecise, slow, and requires absolute coordination between pilot and co-pilot. "Atlantic Airways 428, London Control," the voice finally returned. "We've identified a possible option. Ascension Island, heading 195, distance 120 nautical miles. It has a military runway." My heart jumped. 120 nautical miles, that was within our range. I quickly plotted the course on the chart and calculated the necessary parameters. "London Control, we need information on the Ascension Island runway." "Atlantic Airways 428, standby for runway information." While we waited, I started briefing Mike on our no hydraulics landing procedures. It's something we train in the simulator, but it's completely different doing it in real life, especially with an aircraft full of passengers. "We're going to configure for high-speed approach," I told him. "Speed 200 knots, no flaps, gear lowered manually. It's going to be a very fast and very long landing." Mike nodded, already adjusting the available controls. Even without hydraulics, the 767 was still a sophisticated aircraft. We had enough electrical power to keep navigation systems running. "Atlantic Airways 428, London Control, Ascension Island information. Runway 0725, length 10,000 feet, width 150 feet, asphalt surface. Elevation 278 feet above sea level." I felt momentary relief. 10,000 feet. That was long enough to accommodate a no-flaps high-speed landing. But then came the bad news. Current weather conditions. Wind 280 degrees at 35 knots. Gusts to 50 knots. Visibility 2 miles. Moderate rain. Crosswind of 35 knots gusting to 50. Rain and reduced visibility. For an aircraft without hydraulic controls, it was nearly impossible. "London Control, confirm wind direction 280 degrees. Affirmative, Atlantic Airways 428. 280 degrees at 35 knots, gusts to 50. Mike and I looked at each other. With such strong crosswind and no adequate controls, the chances of managing to align with the runway were minimal. "What's the condition of the parallel runway?" I asked, already knowing there probably wasn't one. "Atlantic Airways 428, there's only one runway on the island. But we have additional information. There's a beach on the east coast of the island about 2 kilometers long, firm sand. Could be an option for emergency landing. Beach landing. It was risky, but maybe our best option given the circumstances." "Mike," I said, keeping my voice calm, "I want you to contact the main cabin. Tell the head flight attendant to start emergency landing preparation procedures. Don't mention the beach yet. Just tell her we're facing technical problems and we're going to make an unscheduled landing." Mike picked up the internal phone and started talking to Sarah, our head flight attendant. I could hear the controlled tension in his voice as he explained the situation. Meanwhile, I started studying all available options on the aeronautical chart. Ascension Island really was our only viable choice in the region. I grabbed the emergency operations manual and looked for any reference to beach landings. There were some basic guidelines, but nothing specific for an aircraft the size of the 767. "Mike," I said, "what do you know about sand landings?" He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Jake, sand can be really soft. We could sink or flip over." "Listen," I interrupted, "if we try to land on the runway with this crosswind and no hydraulic controls, we're going to run off the runway and hit lateral obstacles. But on the beach, even if it's difficult, we have more room for corrections." Mike processed the information for a few seconds. "It's possible," he said slowly, "but it's never been tested in a real situation with passengers." "It's our best shot," I said firmly. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to configure the approach for the beach. You contact London Control and inform them of our intention. I also need you to instruct the cabin for impact position." While Mike made the contacts, I started calculating approach parameters. Without hydraulic controls, I'd only have one chance. If I missed the approach, there would be no possibility of going around. Speed would be critical. Too fast and we couldn't stop, too slow and we'd stall before reaching the beach. "London Control," I heard Mike speaking on the radio. "Atlantic Airways 428 reports intention to land on the beach on the east coast of Ascension Island. We request all available emergency equipment be activated." "Atlantic Airways 428, understood emergency beach landing. We're notifying local authorities and search and rescue teams. You're cleared for any additional assistance." I looked out the window. It was still dark, but I could see the first lights of dawn on the horizon. At least we wouldn't have to do this in total darkness. "Altitude 20,000 feet, Mike reported. "Distance to island, 65 nautical miles. Calculations still indicated it was possible to get there, but it would be extremely tight. "Activate ILS for approach," I instructed. "Jake," Mike hesitated. "The island doesn't have ILS. It's a military base with basic equipment." "Right. No instrument approach systems. We'd have to do everything visually in adverse weather conditions. Then we'll use GPS. Program the beach coordinates into the navigation system." While Mike programmed the system, I took the internal microphone to speak to the passengers. This was the hardest part, explaining the situation without causing panic, but being honest enough so they'd prepare adequately. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Richardson. As you may have noticed, we've made some changes to our flight plan. We're facing a technical problem that requires us to make an unscheduled landing at Ascension Island in the South Atlantic. As a precaution, we're going to perform an emergency landing, which means you must strictly follow the cabin crew's instructions. Keep your seatbelts fastened, put your heads in protective position when instructed, and remain calm. My team and I have extensive experience in situations like this, and we'll do everything in our power to get you safely on the ground." I didn't mention that I'd never faced a situation even remotely like this, nor that the chances of success were, at best, uncertain. "Altitude 15,000 feet, Mike announced. "Approximately 18 minutes to start of approach." 18 minutes. 18 minutes to prepare the most improbable landing in American commercial aviation history. I started mentally reviewing every aspect of the approach. First, I'd need to align perfectly with the beach. Second, speed would have to be exact. Not 1 knot, more or less. Third, descent angle would need to be perfect so we'd touch down at the beginning of the beach, not too early or too late. And all this with strong crosswind, rain, and an aircraft with almost no controls. "Head flight attendant to cockpit," the interphone sounded. "Come in," I responded. Sarah opened the door, and even in the dim cockpit light I could see the concern marked on her face. She had 18 years of commercial flight experience and knew how to recognize when a situation was really serious. "Captain, the cabin is prepared for emergency landing. All passengers are instructed on safety positions, but I need to know what the situation really is." I took a deep breath. Sarah deserved to know the truth. "We've lost both hydraulic systems due to catastrophic failure. We're flying with practically no controls toward a remote island where we're going to try to land on a beach. It's going to be a very difficult landing." I saw her face go pale, but she maintained professional composure. "Understood, Captain. Is there anything specific I can do to improve survival chances?" "Make sure everyone's in impact position at touchdown and prepare for emergency evacuation immediately after the aircraft stops. We don't know what condition the aircraft will be in after landing. You can count on us, Captain?" She left, closing the door behind her. I could hear her voice through the cabin sound system, instructing passengers with calm authority about emergency procedures. "Altitude 10,000 feet, Mike announced. "I can see the island on weather radar." I looked at the radar screen. There was a small landmass appearing ahead of us, surrounded by thousands of square miles of open ocean. Our only chance of salvation. "Configuration for final approach," I ordered. "No flaps, spoilers disarmed. Landing gear prepared to lower manually." "Understood," Mike confirmed. "Jake, Remember, we won't have brake system after landing, only emergency brakes. Another complication. Emergency brakes were significantly less effective than the main system. Another factor working against us. Altitude 5,000 feet. I can see the island visually. I looked ahead and could make out a small dark spot against the ocean, still several miles away. It looked incredibly small and isolated. London Control, Atlantic Airways, 428, beginning final approach to Ascension Island. We request you keep frequency open for assistance. Atlantic Airways, 428, London Control. Frequency open. Local emergency teams have been notified and are on standby. Good luck. Good luck. As if luck would be enough for what we were about to attempt. Altitude 3,000 feet. Ascension Island in sight. 12 o'clock. 6 miles. Now I could see the island clearly. It was bigger than I'd imagined, but still looked tiny in the middle of the infinite ocean. Mike, can you identify the beach? He took binoculars and studied the island carefully. Yeah, I can see it. East coast, a clear strip of sand between the rocks. Looks about 2 kilometers long. Altitude 2,000 feet. Beginning final configuration. It was now or never. I started configuring the aircraft for the most improbable landing of my career. Landing gear, I ordered. Lowering manually, Mike confirmed, activating the emergency system. Landing gear down and locked. The aircraft was now configured for emergency landing. We were committed. There was no turning back. Altitude 1,000 feet. Beach in sight. I could finally see what would be our destination. A clear strip of sand cutting across the small island's coast, surrounded by rock formations. It looked much shorter than the 2 kilometers reported. Speed 180 knots descending, Mike reported, reducing to 170. The approach had to be perfect. Too steep and we'd hit too hard, too shallow, and we couldn't align with the beach. Altitude 800 feet, wind 290 degrees at 38 knots. The crosswind was stronger than predicted. I was going to have to make a significant correction to maintain alignment with the beach. 500 feet, speed 165 knots. The beach was growing rapidly ahead of us. I could now see it had some rock formations at the ends. 200 feet, speed 162 knots. 100 feet, prepare for impact. Brace position, brace position. I heard Sarah shouting in the main cabin. 50 feet, 30 feet, 20 feet, 10 feet, contact. The first impact was harder than I expected. The main gear hit the sand with a dull thud, and immediately I felt the aircraft being slowed by the soft sand. But we were still going way too fast. Maximum emergency brakes, reversers. Mike activated all available braking systems, but I could see we were still moving too fast. The beach was rushing past us at high speed. Still too fast, Mike shouted. I could see the end of the beach approaching rapidly, and beyond it only the rocky coastal formations. That's when I made the most desperate decision of my life. Mike, I'm going to use the rudder to make the aircraft slide sideways. It's our only chance to stop. Hard right rudder, I ordered. Mike applied full right rudder, making the aircraft slide sideways in the sand. It was a desperate maneuver to use lateral friction as additional braking. The aircraft started to spin, the tail sweeping sand and creating a huge cloud. I could hear the sound of structures deforming and systems being damaged. And then, finally, we stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. For a few seconds, none of us moved. We couldn't believe we'd actually done it. Everyone okay? I asked, checking if Mike was injured. I think so, he replied, still in shock. I looked out the window. We were literally 50 feet from the rock formations. If we'd touched down just 1 second later, or if the braking had been slightly less effective, we would have hit the rocks. Emergency shutdown, I ordered. Engine cut off. Electrical systems to standby. Prepare for evacuation. I took the internal microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We have landed safely at Ascension Island. Please remain in your seats until the cabin crew instructs you on evacuation procedures. You performed exemplarily during this emergency. Through the internal systems, I could hear applause coming from the main cabin. Applause from 235 people who had no idea how close they'd come to not surviving. Mike and I quickly completed emergency shutdown procedures. Both engines were damaged from the sand impact, but they'd done their job. The aircraft was structurally damaged, but intact enough to have protected all occupants. Jake, Mike said, taking off his headset. In 18 years of flying together, that was by far the craziest thing we've ever done. And I hope it's the craziest we ever do, I replied. We left the cockpit to check on passenger condition. Sarah and her team had done an extraordinary job, keeping everyone calm and safe during the emergency. There were some minor injuries, mainly bruises and scratches from the sudden deceleration, but nothing serious. While we organized aircraft evacuation, I looked out the window at our emergency beach. The aircraft had left a deep track in the sand, showing exactly how we'd slid to a stop. Over the following hours, rescue teams arrived by helicopter from the island's military base. All 247 aircraft occupants were safely evacuated and taken to where they received medical attention and psychological assistance. The official investigation later determined that the catastrophic hydraulic system failure was caused by simultaneous rupture in two main hydraulic lines due to material fatigue, a statistical combination that occurs once every 10 million flight hours. The landing was subsequently classified by aviation specialists as statistically impossible and contrary to all aircraft performance predictions. The fact that we managed to land a 180-ton 767 on a beach using only engine control defied all existing calculations. The aircraft was later dismantled on the island itself and removed by cargo ships. It was impossible to make it fly again from that location. As for me, I kept flying for a few more years, but I could never look at a beach the same way. Every time I see a strip of sand, I remember those 22 minutes over the Atlantic that changed my perspective on what's really possible when you have no choice. Some people ask if I'm not afraid to fly after what happened. The truth is the opposite. That experience taught me that even in the most impossible situations, even when all systems fail and all odds are against you, there's still a chance. A small chance, but a chance. And sometimes a small chance is all you need. What strikes me most when I think about that day isn't the 22 minutes of emergency or the 2 kilometers of beach. It's the moment after landing when I walked through the cabin and saw 235 faces, people who got to go home, hug their families, continue their lives, parents who got to see their children grow up, children who didn't become orphans, dreams that weren't interrupted. Because in the end, it's not about statistics or probabilities or procedure manuals. It's about people. And if you're willing to try the impossible for 247 people, you might surprise yourself with what you can achieve. Aviation taught me many lessons over the years, but the most important was this. Never underestimate the power of human determination when lives are at stake. The manuals said it was impossible to land that aircraft on that beach. Physics said it was impossible. The odds said it was impossible. But 247 people are alive today to prove that sometimes impossible is just a word we use to describe things we haven't learned how to do yet. And you know what's most incredible? 3 months after that landing, I got a letter from a 12-year-old kid who was on the flight with his parents. He'd drawn an airplane landing on a beach with great care and bright colors. In the letter he wrote, "Thank you for saving us, Captain Jake. When I grow up, I want to be a pilot like you and save people too." That letter is still framed in my office, and every time I look at it, I remember that those 2 kilometers of beach weren't just about emergency landing or piloting skills. They were about giving a kid the chance to grow up and follow his dreams. If you made it this far and this story touched you in some way, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Tell me about a moment in your life when you had to try something that seemed impossible. And if you enjoyed this tale from the skies, subscribe to Black Box so you don't miss the next stories that will make you see aviation with different eyes. Because trust me, the skies are full of stories you never imagined were possible.